The heavy silence of Dallas County Courthouse shattered as Kayla Montgomery's heels struck the cold marble floor. Each step echoed like a declaration of war, reverberating through the packed courtroom with deliberate defiance. At 17 years old, she walked with the posture of someone who had never known the word no, her chin lifted in eternal challenge against a world that had always bowed before her. Camera flashes exploded like furious stars. Journalists whispered among themselves with wide eyes, and lawyers exchanged knowing glances. They all sensed they were about to witness something memorable. The charges were severe: vandalism, reckless driving, obstruction of justice, verbal assault on police officers. But to Kayla, those words were merely background noise, meaningless syllables that couldn't touch her. She had learned from her earliest memories that the Montgomery name was an impenetrable shield, a golden armor that protected her from any consequence the world might dare throw her way. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed on the mahogany table as she surveyed the room with barely disguised contempt. Her diamond ring, a gift from Daddy after her last incident, catching the light like a trophy of immunity. She crossed her legs with calculated elegance, tossed her blonde hair back in what seemed like a rehearsed gesture, and allowed an arrogant smile to dance across her lips. "They can't do anything to me," she thought, feeling the familiar power of money pulsing through her veins like electricity. The anxious murmur of the crowd was music to her ears, the soundtrack to yet another guaranteed victory in her charmed life. Judge Samuel Whitaker sat motionless at his bench, an island of calm in a sea of nervous energy. Nearly 30 years of service had carved deep lines into his weathered face, each one a testament to battles fought for justice against corruption, privilege, and entitlement. His steel-grey eyes moved methodically across the documents before him, absorbing every detail with the precision of a surgeon examining a patient. He had seen arrogance before, countless times in fact, but something about this girl's demeanor struck a different chord, a jarring note that resonated with danger. It wasn't just confidence, it was something darker, more toxic, a complete disconnection from reality itself, as if she existed in a parallel universe where laws were mere suggestions for lesser people. The courtroom held its collective breath as he slowly removed his reading glasses, folded them with deliberate care, and lifted his gaze to meet Kayla's defiant stare. What he saw there both saddened and steeled him. A young woman so thoroughly corrupted by privilege that she genuinely believed herself untouchable above the very fabric of society that protected her wealth. The murmurs died completely as his fingers interlaced on the bench before him, his wedding ring catching the fluorescent light, a simple gold band that cost less than Kayla's manicure, but meant infinitely more. He had taken an oath, spoken sacred words that bound him to justice above all else, above money, above power, above the influence of families who thought they owned the world. Today, he would honor that oath, regardless of the consequences that might rain down upon him afterward. When her name was called, Kayla rose from her seat like a queen, ascending to address her subjects, every movement choreographed for maximum dramatic effect. She smoothed her designer dress, worth more than most people's monthly rent, and walked to the witness stand with deliberate slowness, savoring the attention like a starlet on a red carpet. Her heels clicked an arrogant rhythm against the floor, a metronome of entitlement that seemed to mock the very sanctity of the courtroom. She placed one perfectly manicured hand on the Bible, but her fingers never actually touched its worn surface, hovering above it as if even symbolic gestures were beneath her station. The oath she spoke was delivered with theatrical boredom, each word dripping with the subtext, "This is all just a formality before Daddy fixes everything." She settled into the witness chair and immediately began adjusting it, tilting it back slightly, crossing her legs, arranging her hair over one shoulder, transforming the solemn seat of testimony into her personal throne. The microphone screeched slightly as she pulled it closer, and instead of apologizing, she rolled her eyes as if the equipment itself had failed to meet her standards. Judge Whitaker watched this performance with growing concern, recognizing the signs of someone so disconnected from reality that even a courtroom felt like just another stage for her personal drama. Her lawyer, a nervous man with sweat beading on his forehead, leaned forward and whispered urgently in her ear, probably begging her to show some respect, some humility, some recognition of the gravity of her situation. But Kayla just waved him away like an annoying insect, her expression making it clear that she found his concern not just unnecessary, but insulting to her intelligence. Prosecutor Daniel Barnes rose slowly, his movements measured and deliberate as he approached the presentation screen. With a click of the remote, the courtroom exploded into shocked gasps and whispered curses as video footage filled the massive display. There was Kayla, captured in high definition, her face twisted with manic glee as she sped through a residential neighborhood at twice the legal limit, her laughter audible even over the roar of her luxury car's engine. The camera showed her deliberately swerving around safety cones, treating the street like her personal racetrack while families dove for safety. Another video showed the moment police tried to intervene, Kayla's face contorting with rage as she shoved a female officer hard enough to send the woman stumbling backward, her voice shrieking obscenities that made even the hardened court reporters wince. "Do you know who my father is? Do you know who you're touching?" The words echoed through the silent courtroom like accusations from hell itself. More footage rolled. Kayla spitting at an officer, Kayla kicking at patrol car doors, Kayla's face purple with fury as 4 officers struggled to restrain her flailing limbs. The prosecutor's voice cut through the horror like a knife. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing isn't just criminal behavior. It's a complete breakdown of human decency. A young woman so corrupted by privilege that she sees fellow human beings as obstacles to be destroyed." Yet even as the videos played, even as the entire courtroom watched in stunned disbelief, Kayla sat picking at her nail polish, occasionally checking her reflection in her phone's dark screen, completely unmoved by the evidence of her own monstrous behavior. The testimony of Officer Maria Rodriguez shattered what remained of the courtroom's composure. Her voice trembled as she described the night in vivid, painful detail. How Kayla had not just resisted arrest, but had targeted her specifically, hurling racial slurs and gender-based insults with the practiced cruelty of someone who knew exactly where to strike. "She told me I was nothing, that people like me existed only to serve people like her," Officer Rodriguez said, her hands shaking as she gripped the witness stand. "She said her father could have me fired, deported, destroyed, and she laughed while saying it like my entire life was a joke to her." Tears streamed down the officer's face as she continued, describing how Kayla had mocked her uniform, her badge, her very existence as a law enforcement officer, trying to protect the community. The emotional testimony painted a picture far darker than simple teenage rebellion. This was systematic dehumanization, learned behavior from a lifetime of believing other people were props in her personal movie. Barnes presented text messages next, screenshots from Kayla's phone, showing conversations with friends where she bragged about her behavior, complete with laughing emojis. "Just got arrested again, LOL. Dad's gonna be so annoyed." Whatever, he'll fix it like always. The messages continued, each one more damning than the last, showing a pattern of escalating behavior with zero remorse. Former classmates testified about years of bullying, of Kayla using her family's money and influence to torment anyone she perceived as beneath her, which apparently included everyone. Through it all, Kayla sat stone-faced, occasionally sighing dramatically, as if the testimonies were boring her rather than destroying any remaining sympathy anyone might have harbored for her. The moment that would seal Kayla's fate came suddenly, explosively, like a grenade detonating in the hushed courtroom. Prosecutor Barnes had been methodically building his case, presenting evidence after evidence, when Kayla finally snapped under the weight of reality, threatening to crash down upon her perfect world. She lunged forward in her seat, her face flushed with fury, and shouted over her lawyer's desperate attempts to silence her. "This is ridiculous. Do you people not understand who you're dealing with?" The courtroom froze. Every eye locked on the teenager who seemed determined to destroy herself. But she wasn't finished, not even close. "My father is Richard Montgomery. He owns half this city. He could buy this courtroom. He could buy you, Judge Whittaker, if he wanted to." The words hung in the air like poison gas, suffocating any remaining doubt about her character. Her lawyer's face went white as printer paper, his hands actually shaking as he tried to grab her arm, to stop the catastrophic flow of words. But Kayla jerked away from him with disgust. "Don't touch me, I'm telling the truth. Everyone knows it. Money runs everything. My dad says judges like him are the easiest to buy. You just figure out what they want and pay them off." Judge Whittaker's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened, a subtle shift from disappointment to resolve. The courtroom erupted in chaos, journalists frantically typing, spectators gasping, lawyers shouting for order. But through it all, Kayla stood there, breathing hard, her chest heaving, apparently believing she had just won some kind of victory by speaking her truth, too blind to see she had just hammered the final nail into her own coffin. Judge Whittaker's gavel came down like thunder, the sound so sharp and decisive that every person in the courtroom jumped. "Order!" His voice, usually measured and calm, now carried the weight of 30 years of accumulated authority, of countless battles fought for the integrity of the justice system. The room fell silent so completely that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. "Miss Montgomery," he began, his voice dangerously quiet, "you have just accused this court of corruption. You have insulted the very foundation of our legal system. You have demonstrated, beyond any shadow of doubt, that you believe yourself above the law." Kayla opened her mouth to respond, that familiar, arrogant smirk starting to form, but the judge raised one hand, and the gesture was so commanding that she actually stopped. "I have presided over thousands of cases in my career. I have seen addiction, poverty, mental illness, and circumstances that would break most people. I have shown mercy where mercy was warranted. But what I see before me now is perhaps the most dangerous thing that can exist in a civilized society. A young person so thoroughly corrupted by wealth and privilege that she has lost all connection to human decency." The words hit like physical blows, each sentence stripping away another layer of Kayla's protective delusion. Her lawyer sat with his head in his hands, knowing the case was lost, that his client had destroyed any chance of leniency with her own mouth. Barnes watched with grim satisfaction, knowing justice was finally catching up with someone who had evaded it for far too long. And Kayla, for the first time since entering the courtroom, felt the cold finger of real fear touch her spine. "The court finds the defendant, Kayla Montgomery, guilty on all charges." The words fell like a guillotine blade, sharp and final and irreversible. Kayla's face went white, then red, then white again as the blood drained from her features. "Wait, what? No, that's not possible." Her voice cracked on the last word, the carefully constructed facade of confidence crumbling like sand. But Judge Whittaker wasn't finished, not even close. "Furthermore, this court must address your conduct here today. Your attempt to intimidate this institution, your contempt for the rule of law, and your demonstrated belief that you are above accountability represent a clear and present danger, not just to yourself, but to everyone around you." He paused, letting the words sink in, watching as true fear began to replace arrogance in Kayla's wide eyes. "Therefore, in addition to full restitution for all damages, mandatory psychological counseling, and community service, you are hereby sentenced to 90 days in juvenile detention to begin immediately." The courtroom exploded. Journalists shouted questions, spectators gasped. Kayla's mother let out a wail of anguish from the front row. But loudest of all was Kayla herself, who leapt to her feet, her chair clattering backward. "You can't do this. My father will appeal. He'll have you removed. He'll—" "Miss Montgomery," the judge interrupted, his voice cutting through her hysteria like a laser. "Your father's money holds no power in this courtroom. This is a house of justice, not a marketplace where privilege is bought and sold." He nodded to the bailiffs, who began moving toward her with practiced efficiency. "Officers, take her into custody." And in that moment, Kayla's entire world, the bubble of wealth and privilege and immunity, finally, irrevocably shattered. The cold steel of handcuffs closing around Kayla's wrists produced a sound that would haunt her forever. A sharp, metallic click that seemed to echo through eternity, the sound of consequences finally catching up. "No! Get off me! Don't you dare touch me!" she screamed, thrashing against the officer's firm grip, her designer dress twisting around her as she tried desperately to pull away. Her perfectly styled hair came loose, mascara began running down her cheeks in black rivers, and the diamond ring that symbolized her immunity scratched uselessly against the handcuffs as she struggled. "My father will sue every single one of you. Do you understand? You'll lose everything." But the officers had heard it all before, and they continued their work with professional detachment, securing her hands behind her back and beginning to escort her toward the door. The cameras went wild, flashes creating a strobe effect as journalists captured every moment of her breakdown. The fall of Dallas's most privileged princess making headlines in real time. "Call my dad! Somebody call him right now!" Kayla's voice broke into sobs, no longer the confident teenager who had swaggered into court hours earlier, but a terrified child facing reality for the first time. Her mother tried to rush forward, but was held back by court security, her own face a mask of tears and shock. "Please, baby, stop fighting. Just go with them, please." But Kayla couldn't hear her mother's pleas over her own screaming, over the sound of her entire identity collapsing. As the courtroom doors opened and she was led into the corridor, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the polished brass. Mascara streaked, hair wild, hands cuffed, and for a split second she didn't recognize the broken girl staring back at her. The juvenile detention center was nothing like Kayla had imagined, cold, institutional, utterly devoid of the luxury that had cushioned every moment of her existence. The intake process stripped away her final shreds of dignity. Photographs, fingerprints, a thorough search, the exchange of her designer clothes for a standard-issue uniform. No special treatment, no exceptions, no daddy to call and fix everything. She sat on the narrow bed in her cell, the thin mattress nothing like the pillow-top king she'd always known, and for the first time in her 17 years, Kayla Montgomery was truly alone with herself. The silence was crushing, suffocating, forcing her to hear her own thoughts without the constant distraction of social media, parties, shopping, friends who weren't really friends at all. Hours passed like years, each minute stretching into eternity as she replayed the day's events in her mind. The judge's words, the officers' faces, her mother's tears, her own voice screaming things she now desperately wished she could take back. Somewhere around midnight, as moonlight filtered through the barred window, something inside her broke. Not her spirit, but the armor of arrogance that had protected her from ever having to feel real emotion. The tears came then, not the manipulative tears she'd learned to produce on demand, but deep, racking sobs that shook her entire body. For the first time, she felt shame, real, burning shame, for what she'd done, who she'd hurt, who she'd become. When her father finally arrived the next day, furious and ready to unleash lawyers and money and influence, Kayla looked at him through the barrier glass and whispered the words she'd never meant before in her life. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And in that moment, in that cold institutional room where money couldn't reach, the real work of becoming a better human being, a real human being, finally began. She didn't know if 90 days would be enough to change her completely, but for the first time in her life, Kayla Montgomery understood one fundamental truth. Money could buy comfort, lawyers, even reputation, but it could never buy character, and it could never ever buy justice. Did Kayla's story move you? There's so much more to discover. If you enjoyed this powerful tale of consequence and redemption, you'll love the compelling stories we share every day. From courtroom dramas to life-changing moments, we bring you narratives that will make you think, feel, and see the world differently.